Welcome, Coda Aficionados and digital daredevils, to a podcast that's about to dive deep into the fascinating world of WebAssembly. WebAssembly, or WASM for the initiated, is revolutionizing modern engineering, pushing the boundaries of what developers can do. It's like a secret portal connecting your code to the digital cosmos. On this show, F5's Joel Moses, Oscar Spencer, and Matthew Yakabuchi will be your guides to this virtual dimension, decoding the mysteries and unveiling the endless possibilities. So strap in for a bite-sized adventure as we take off with WebAssembly Unleashed.
Hey, thank you, Tabitha, and hello, everybody. Welcome to WASM Unleashed, your source for news and views about the world of WebAssembly. I'm your host today, Joel Moses, and I'm pleased to welcome you to our inaugural episode. I'm especially pleased to welcome my co-hosts, Matt Yakabuchi and Oscar Spencer, who aren't just WebAssembly fans, they're actually inside the community pushing it forward. They're also a lot of fun to hang out with, and you're going to find that out. We get to introductions in a moment, but first, I'd like to preview what we're planning for some future episodes. Now, we were always planning to talk about what's happening in the community that's notable or exciting, and we'll provide some perspectives on what proposals, changes, or updates mean to the WASM standard. And by perspective, I mean some unvarnished and unpolished opinions. But along the way, we plan to invite in some special guests who are doing noteworthy things in the community. Perhaps make some time for special episodes where we do crazy stuff like exploring the intersection of WASM with pop culture, talking with industry luminaries about why some past bytecode runtimes actually failed to take hold and why that is, and examining how WASM is actually helping us recover and restore the early days of the World Wide Web. Now, we were launching just as the state of WebAssembly survey results have hit the street, and boy, there's a lot to unpack there. But as this is episode number 1, before we get to all of that, let's get to know Matt and Oscar a little bit. Matt, let the folks know what you're doing in the WASM community and why WASM interests you.
Thanks, Joel. Yeah, my name's Matt Yakabuchi. I'm very interested in the WebAssembly community because of the power of plugins that it's going to bring to the market. For instance, let's take a look at Go. Go is a great language, but it's statically compiled. Everything is built into the binary in order to bring in third-party dependencies, or I mean, not third-party dependencies, but third-party code, extensions, extensibility. WebAssembly starts to make a lot of sense from a security perspective, also from just being able to update the runtime or update the execution dynamically during execution. It's pretty exciting. So I'm excited to look at the plugins, the plugin model, the component model. I'm excited to think about a new way of thinking about the operating system, new abstractions, different abstractions that could free us up from some of the baggage of the past. So just focusing on emerging technologies and seeing how they can work for F5 and the rest of the community.
Well, that's a great segue to Oscar, who I know has come straight through the idea of creating plugins with WebAssembly and joins us from the Suborbital organization. Oscar, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been in the WASM game for some time now. It's been a wild ride just seeing how the ecosystem has shaped up. But I got into WebAssembly in about 2017. I'm one of the creators of the Grain programming language, which is a programming language that targets WebAssembly as its only target. It's been a lot of fun just doing that. So being a compiler nerd, feel free to reach out to me anytime if you want to nerd out about compilers or about really low level WebAssembly. But outside of that, getting to use WebAssembly at work. So at Suborbital, I was the director of engineering. And so really thinking through how we can use WebAssembly on the server side. How can we push WebAssembly to the edge? Literally. Right. Been in the space for quite a while and excited to continue all that work moving forward.
Well, that's great, and you mentioned Grain, and I'm sure that's going to be an episode unto itself.
Yeah,
coming in the future. But let's get right to the WebAssembly, the State of WebAssembly survey. This is a survey by Scott Logic. For the past couple of years, it's actually kind of formed the core of what the community is kind of thinking in general. As both of you have read through, I'm assuming both of you have read through it. As both of you have read through the report, what jumped out at you as the most significant result?
I think it's the adoption of languages, the serverless and the plugin language support. Of course, Rust is the highest desired and the most used language for a couple reasons we can go back to, but WASM time is written in Rust. Rust has a intersecting community with WebAssembly, but seeing Zig, which is a new language but has targeted WebAssembly almost from the beginning. Swift support, it's now on the growing support. And then also, what proposals are people really thinking about? There are two very mature proposals that are desired. Threads, that's going to start giving us concurrency. That's going to start giving us perhaps avenues into async, garbage collection, which is also necessary. But then you see third most interesting is interested in is component model. And that's where we're going to start seeing pluggability, or being able to pass around these byte codes and then link them and then to start sharing them.
Yeah, language support is interesting. And Oscar, I kind of want to ask you this one, because I've seen some reporting on this externally, which suggests, for example, that Rust has won out WebAssembly, which is not what I think those graphs in the report actually indicate what's happening. I mean, as I look at it, Swift actually had the biggest mindshare increase comparatively to Rust. I mean, Rust climbed, but it didn't to the degree that Swift did. What do you think is correct? Is Rust really sucking up all the air out of the room for WASM?
I think that's a fabulous question. In some ways, the answer is absolutely yes, and in some ways, no. The big way to look at it, right, is Rust has been this premier language for WebAssembly. Rust has been the go-to. If you look at all the different tooling and even some of the most popular runtimes, they're all written in Rust. It just makes it so dang easy to be a WebAssembly developer if you're targeting Rust, because all the crates are there. Everything you need to do anything with WebAssembly is readily available. When you say, actually, I want to start this project and I want to write it and go, there's a couple of hoops you got to jump through to, make that work. So, Rust is, and it's a phenomenal language. People like writing Rust, so it makes a lot of sense. It's phenomenal to see increases in language like Swift, to see, hey, actually, they've been putting a bunch of effort into WASM support in Swift, and people want to write Swift. And so it's great to see that mindshare increase. And it's also, and this is another interesting point, to see the number of people using AssemblyScript has gone down quite a bit. And, there's some reasons for that. But additionally, part of that is just, hey, other tool chains are getting more mature, right? Where it used to be the case, oh man, I just need to write this WebAssembly that does this thing, and AssemblyScript really let you just write the thing to do the thing. And now it's a lot easier to say, actually, I can just spit out, Rust module to do that, or even now I can spit out a Go module to do this thing, right? So I think it's definitely interesting to look at, but I wouldn't say Rust has completely won out, and there's a whole special interest group on just support in different languages, right? So people are thinking all of this.
Yeah, do you think Rust maybe just is the first mover, and that's why they retain the top slot?
Yeah,
I think so.
You could certainly think that. Yeah.
I mean, I think so. This is where the tool chains were the most advanced. But to underscore what Oscar was saying is, as the tool chains advance, for instance, Golang is natively supporting WASM targets now. Zig is supporting WASM targets. Componentize, Python, Jco, they're all advancing together.
Right. Did it surprise you to see Python climbing in interest?
Not at all. It's so one of the things that's suborbital, we took code from our customers and compiled it all to WebAssembly. So naturally, we supported Rust and languages like that easily could compile to WebAssembly. But number one and number two asks for languages were JavaScript and Python. And so especially when you see projects like PyScript that came out that said, hey, actually, let's make it super easy for you to just go do WebAssembly stuff like in Python. And to see okay, now we can actually start compiling Python code to standalone WebAssembly modules and doing it that way too. It just makes sense. Developers love these languages, and if you can make them work in WebAssembly, they absolutely will use them.
One of the critiques that I've read of the survey is that it seems to express the interest of the enthusiast community more than it does the enterprise community. Do you think that's the case? Do you think perhaps Rust wins out because enthusiasts use Rust, but everybody else in the enterprise world demands, like you said, JavaScript and Python?
I think the first half of that is at least certainly true, right? I think the people who get the survey and do the survey are the enthusiasts. People are super hype about using WebAssembly and doing that, right? And so I think you're going to see a lot of that. So, the survey is very useful to look at, but I think we can also take it with a grain of salt that it's just the view of, some collection of people. Once WebAssembly gets more popular, so every year as the survey comes out, you're going to start seeing more people using it in enterprise, because you can ask yourself, how many people do you know in the enterprise who are actually using WebAssembly? I might happen to know a lot, but that's sort of just because of, the job, right? So we'll have to keep looking as things continue to progress.
Matt, do you think that's the case as well?
Well, yeah, we might be seeing responder bias, right? We're at the order of hundreds of respondents, and so the most excited are the ones that will tend to shift the results. But it's also hard to say without seeing the source of the data. For instance, there are a lot of enterprise companies that are exploring WebAssembly quite significantly. For instance, you'll see in the report, one of the examples that they use is Microsoft. Microsoft Flight Sim is now supporting WebAssembly modules. So this is another intersection of the gaming community, emerging technology, but an enterprise software company that's.
Well, actually, the report did cite that as an interesting example, the Microsoft Flight Simulator example, as an interesting example of an application plugin rendered in WebAssembly. And the survey covered WebAssembly use cases, and of course, the usuals were still on top: web application development and serverless. But I was actually surprised that application plugins were ranked even higher. I think in the first survey, they didn't even register. In the past 2 years, it looks like people are much more interested in crafting plug-in architectures with WebAssembly. Why do you think that is, Oscar?
Oh, it's pretty simple to me. It's that everyone has seen WebAssembly come out as a technology and say, "Oh man, this technology is cool," but what can I do? And I think a lot of the industry, especially if you look at startups, early on, they were focused on greenfield development, building brand new applications and whatnot. But really, the case is actually, developers have apps that already exist, and they want to put WebAssembly in it. And the first thing that comes to mind is, hey, this is a secure sandbox. I can just execute, whatever I want. So in that case, why not just do, if this, then that, just in my app, right? Just let people write code that does whatever they want inside of my app, right? So it's very clear that that's an easy winner here. And I think over time, we'll start to see more people doing greenfield development, building apps purely out of WebAssembly. But right now, just taking advantage of the sandbox, hey, that makes a lot of sense to me.
Right. All right, Matt, what do you think about the plugin comments Oscar made?
Yeah, I'd like to agree and underscore. Let's think about, or let's talk about the properties that WebAssembly gives you. It's sandboxed. Therefore, the memory is segmented away from the host. We have hardware portability. We have software portability or language portability. And the reason and also very compact bytecode that's easy to pass around. Reason we have these properties is because WebAssembly was born from the browser use cases, really like the ultimate plugin system, right? The browser is always downloading insecure code or unknown code, and there's multiple ways to extend the browser. I think what you're seeing is maturing pipelines, maturing tool chains, and then an understanding of the use cases that WebAssembly gives you on the server side, and therefore plugins are a very natural fit. It also frees you up from some of the bindings that host languages can give you. I talked about how Go plugin systems are somewhat constrained, and all of a sudden when you look at WebAssembly, you're like, well, I can have it all now. I can still have my host in Go, but then have these dynamic systems underneath.
Now, you mentioned the word maturity. And I thought one of the more interesting things in the results were the level, and I mean the high level of dissatisfaction and impatience with WASI. that jumped out at me as something fairly important. I know the community has been struggling with the pace of WASI. It's actually caused forks in the community. What do you think is behind that? Oscar, what do you think?
Yeah, it's just that this stuff takes a while. I think one thing that people don't think about very much is the fact that WebAssembly is definitely a cross-industry initiative, right? It's not just one organization saying, hey, this is the way it is. It's not like, early days of the Go programming language where Google said, hey, yeah, this is the language, here you go. And that's it, right? So we have to have consensus amongst a lot of different organizations and people who want to see this all succeed, right? And the thing is we can't get it wrong. It's so incredibly difficult to go back and change standards after the fact, right? So it takes a lot of work. And the other thing too, right, is it's hard to prioritize within an organization, right? So if your company's not sponsoring you to go forth and work on standards, then you're doing it in your own free time, right? I look at work that I've done on certain standards that wasn't necessarily related to my job, right? That's just on my free time, right? Just saying, oh,
Right.
yeah, I feel like doing this, even though this is something that could potentially benefit the entire industry, right? So it's just that these things take time. People need to get involved, and we need to put more resources in. It's as simple as that. And you're not going to get standards to advance any more quickly by just complaining and not actually being willing to go in and put in the work.
I think this survey did come out just prior to the release of WASI Preview 2 as well. So do you think that the drop of Preview 2 is going to make the community happy about the pace of WASI? Or are we still going to see some people forking?
Is WASI Preview 2 officially out yet?
Well,
it is. It's
No.
very close. It's very close.
it has the word preview right in there, Oscar. I mean, come on.
Number 2, yeah.
I think it has to help satisfy some of the enthusiasm around WASI and WebAssembly. Go ahead, Oscar. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, it certainly helps, right? People see that things are happening. People see that progress is being made. And I think that's, the big stuff. Like people want to see, like, I think the thing is, especially around like WASI in particular, a lot of people just want to port old apps and make them work inside of WebAssembly. And so Preview 2 gets you a lot, further the way there. You don't have, fork or like some of the other syscalls that.
What do you need that for? I mean, come on.
You don't need it, right? So you don't have like some of those syscalls, right? But like, it is advancing. It's getting a little further. And I think especially we have to put ourselves in the shoes of like some people who are building startups right now based around WebAssembly as a core technology. And it's tough, right? If your business depends on these standards and being able to, build applications and build features to ship to customers, and the standards aren't progressing, and, your runway is, over at the end of the year, you've got a big problem. And I'd be pretty upset too. So, I definitely understand a lot of folks, frustration around things. I also understand some of the biggest companies that are working on standards and whatnot have much longer timelines, right? Where it says like, oh man, we would love to be able to do X by 2037 or, insert whatever year here, right? So it's a lot easier for these bigger companies to take their time and make things happen. So
that's about as fast paced as building public transit here in Seattle. 2037. Matt, one of the interesting things I saw in there is the WebAssembly adoption. 41% of respondents said they were using WebAssembly in production environments. Is that a high number, or do you consider that a low number?
Good question. Good question. Personally, I think it's high. I think it's a surprising and a positive number, but I do think it's a little high for where we are, especially on server side. I would also like to think or to see like what number of respondents are using it in the browser or using it client side versus server side. I would expect client side is the majority of that 41%.
Yeah, that doesn't come through clearly in the numbers. That's true.
Yeah, and to piggyback on that as well, I think as we were saying earlier, I think a lot of the survey respondents are enthusiasts, and I imagine the enthusiasts are using WebAssembly in production. Sure, I think that's just the case.
Now, they covered off what the biggest needs are for WebAssembly, and of course, WASI is up there pretty high. number one with a bullet. But better debugging support is up there, is something that WebAssembly desperately needs. Do you agree with that, Oscar?
Oh, absolutely. It's something that I think people don't feel is really happening right now. Like, you don't really see very many proposals that are there saying, oh, debugging story proposal, right? It's mostly like, oh yeah, cool threads and
Oh,
GC,
yeah.
stack switching, all these other things, right?
Yeah, it's not the sexy part, is it?
It's not the sexy part, unfortunately. And I think it is something that's incredibly important, especially, as a language author who's building for WebAssembly. I want people to be able to debug their code and not come DM me personally to figure out what's going, on with the programs, right? So I think we do have to take it more seriously. And I've talked to some folks in the community about this and folks' thoughts. And the main answer I get from people right now is we're trying to get WASM Preview 2 out. We're trying to get WASM Preview 3 out. We're trying to ship some of these things. And then we're going to then when people are using the stuff and seriously complaining, oh man, I can't debug this, then we're going to go ahead and really put our thinking caps on and make something happen, which is fair. I couldn't, respond to that and be like, oh no, we have to care about it right now. I'm like, yeah, no, let's get it working. Like that totally makes sense to me.
Right. Matt, is it important for WASI to get, and WebAssembly in general, to get critical mass before it focuses on things that are developer assist tools like debugging and better integration with browser APIs, things like that?
I think that's the case in a we've seen trends like this before. Going back to Golang, Golang released a pretty solid toolchain compiler and language without a debugger because there were other ways to get around it, and it can be a pretty difficult problem. So it took the community to find a need to then build Delve, which is now a very accomplished debugger. At first, you'd have to go through GDB and look at the VM to kind of discern what your Go program was doing, right? Like, people want features. People want features. They want things to solve their use case. And then they realize that things break. And debugging often comes second. But it's going to be something that the community needs to solve as more and more modules and components are developed and then linked together. We're going to have more and more emergent properties and more and more need to do debugging. That's why another thing that jumped out at me was observability and telemetry wasn't as high in the desired rankings as I thought it would be. I think you'll start seeing, I predict, 2024 that something like observability or built-in telemetry, OTel, for instance, is going to be a lot higher on that list.
Now, on number 6 in that list, it still gets into the top 6, is something that I think is related to community building, and it was a stronger and more inclusive community. To the question to the both of you, what do you think enthusiasts and people who are working in this field can do to create a stronger and more inclusive community? What does that mean?
Yeah, I think and this is something I hear from folks all the time, because there are many, many people who want to get involved and contribute, but they say actually it's just very difficult to understand everything that's going on, and two, when you do understand what's going on, how to actually get in and contribute, just because there's not a ton of documentation of things that are going on, right? And I find, for myself, it's like, one, yeah, I know some things, but a lot of the time when I need to understand something, I'm going and reading source code, right? And that's not super accessible to a lot of people, because sometimes that's just not people's preferred style of learning. And sometimes it's a matter of what source code should you even be looking at to understand the problem, that you're trying to tackle. And so I think the biggest thing is documentation and just getting the information out there so folks understand. And there are some efforts around that right now, but we all have to do, better about it. And just content creation, right? Even stuff like this is even helpful just to help people understand what's going on.
I'd like to put a positive spin on it, though. It's engineers doing engineering, right? And so some things are fall off the tail end. I know when I first started trying to attend meetings, it was a little bit difficult to find out the exact meeting you wanted to go to. Sometimes you had to ask someone, and they pointed you to someone, and then you got an invite. We can definitely improve on that. I think it needs a good, collated SIG structure and good processes around that. But like the positive spin, engineers doing engineering, and there's a lot of great work going on under the hood here.
All right. Well, time is ticking down, but I want to give you guys each a chance to surface something maybe we weren't able to talk about. Oscar, you got anything before we go?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing that I'm excited by is that, the survey just keeps increasing every year. All right. It's getting more reach.
Bigger and bigger.
Bigger and bigger. It's getting more reach. More people are interested. And that's the thing that I care about the most right now, is that the fact that folks are getting interested. Just that alone means we're going to get more eyes on it. We're going to get more development, more people willing to work on proposals, willing to work on the specs. So when folks are complaining, it's not moving fast enough. Well, people might just more folks. There's that one random developer out there who's like, oh yeah, I'm going to go, let me go write this thing. Right. So I'm excited about that. So I'm just excited to see how large the space is growing. And I hope it continues to, grow as big as it can. I really think this can revolutionize the way that we do software development. And that's not just me drinking the Kool-Aid. It is good amount of this,
well, maybe a little bit.
just a little bit. But I really do think that, there's a real opportunity here. So to see it continue to grow just gets me more excited every day.
That's great. Matt, closing thoughts?
Yeah, I just want to talk about how, community events are continuing to grow. We had our first Linux Foundation WASMCon. There's WASM.io, and then there's WASM Days that is compacted along with KubeCon or CNCFCon, I think is the right way to term it these days. So get involved, look around for meetups and conferences, because they're on the rise.
Great. I'm marking my calendar already.
And just to piggyback off of that, I'm just going to give a shout out to check out your local communities. There often is a local community meetup. In fact, so I live in Austin, Texas, and tonight is the weekly Austin WebAssembly meetup, which I have to head to and be slightly late because of the podcast today. But seriously, just check out your local communities. You'd be shocked at how many cities have a WebAssembly meetup. And so just go get involved, chat with folks. It's an absolute blast.
All right, that's great. Thanks, Oscar. Thanks, Matt. Just a reminder, it's a big application world out there, and it's time for us to unleash the power and promise of WebAssembly. So for Oscar, Matt, and myself, thank you for listening in. Be sure to subscribe for future WASM news and views. Take care.
That's a wrap for our WebAssembly adventure, fellow code explorers. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, may WASM be with you.